For decades, American farmers trusted government advice and spread sewage sludge called biosolids on their fields, promised as safe, eco-friendly fertilizer. But hidden within that promise was a toxic secret, PFAS, the forever chemicals that quietly poisoned the land and turned productive farms worthless. How did following official guidance lead to generational ruin? And why has no one stepped in to stop it? Fred Stone grew up believing in his land. Stone Ridge Farm in Arundel, Maine, had been in his family for over a century. Its fields and barns passed down through 3 generations. Like so many others, Stone followed guidance from government experts and university extension agents. From 1983 to 2004, he spread biosolids on his pastures, treated sewage sludge that had been rebranded as a safe, sustainable fertilizer. He trusted the advice. He wanted to do right by his cows and his community. But in 2016, everything changed. Water tests came back with alarming results. PFAS chemicals, the forever chemicals, had seeped into wells, into soil, and into the grass. The contamination moved into the cows, then into the milk they produced. When samples were tested, the milk contained PFAS levels 7 times higher than Maine's legal safety limit. There was no way to clean the milk, and no way to sell it. For a dairy farmer, that meant the end. Stone watched as nearly his entire herd, cows he had raised and cared for, had to be euthanized. The family's health began to fail. Blood tests showed high levels of PFAS, and illnesses followed. The farm, once a source of pride and purpose, became a site of heartbreak and fear. By 2019, after more than 100 years, Stone Ridge Farm closed for good. The land could not be farmed, the milk could not be sold, and the property was now worthless. Fred Stone put it simply, being the one running around telling everyone the sky is falling in is not a great situation. He never set out to be a warning. He just followed the rules and lost everything. Biosolids, once known as sewage sludge, are the end product of wastewater treatment. Every day, water from homes, factories, and businesses carries waste down the drain. At treatment plants, most bacteria and heavy metals are filtered out. What is left behind is a thick, nutrient-rich sludge. For decades, this material has been sold or given away to farmers as a cheap fertilizer. In 2023 alone, more than 1 million dry metric tons of biosolids were spread across fields in 41 states. Nearly 70 million acres of American farmland, an area the size of Nevada, may now be contaminated. Hidden in this fertilizer are PFAS chemicals. These synthetic compounds have been used since the 1940s in products like non-stick pans, waterproof jackets, and food wrappers. PFAS are sometimes called forever chemicals because they never break down in the environment. Once released, they move from biosolids into soil, then into crops, groundwater, and eventually the food supply. In cattle, PFAS can linger for months, and in humans, they can remain for years. Health experts link PFAS exposure to cancer, immune system problems, liver damage, and developmental delays, making this a serious health concern and a truly forever problem. No current technology can remove PFAS from contaminated soil. The chemicals bind tightly to organic matter and resist all natural decay. With each season, the contamination builds, moving up the food chain. There are no federal requirements to test biosolids for PFAS, and no warnings for the farmers who trustingly spread them. The result is a silent, permanent transformation of farmland, one that cannot be reversed. Maine became the first state to pull back the curtain on the true scale of biosolids contamination. In 2021, state investigators mapped over 700 sites where biosolids had been spread on farmland, parks, and residential properties. Water samples poured in from wells across the state, 2,919 in total. The numbers told a grim story. 576 samples, or about 1 in 5, contained PFAS levels above Maine's safety threshold of 20 parts per trillion. Even more disturbing, 15% of those contaminated samples measured over 1,000 parts per trillion, 50 times the legal limit. The crisis was not limited to dairy. Beef ranches, vegetable plots, and even organic farms tested positive. Adam Nordell, a young organic farmer in Unity, discovered his land was laced with PFAS from biosolids applied years before he arrived. His soil was so contaminated that growing food was no longer an option. Nordell's story echoed across Maine, a new generation of farmers inheriting toxic ground, unable to sell crops or even the land itself. To keep families safe, the state scrambled to install filtration systems. By early 2025, nearly 500 homes and farms relied on expensive filters, each costing around $5,000 a year to maintain. For most, it was the only line of defense against water they could no longer trust. Testing was far from finished. Each week, new contaminated sites appeared on the map, and the tally of affected families grew. Maine's investigation uncovered a scale of damage that no one had wanted to imagine, and that most states still refused to look for. On January 14, 2025, the EPA released a draft risk assessment that stunned the agricultural world. The agency's own findings said that just 1 part per billion of PFAS in biosolids is enough to exceed acceptable health risk thresholds. The warning was clear. Even the smallest trace could contaminate water, milk, meat, and vegetables from farms using biosolids. The agency opened the draft for public comment through August 14, 2025, and then took no further action. No new regulations, no national ban, no relief for the people living with the fallout. As the federal government stalled, farmers were left to fend for themselves. Tony Coleman in Texas lost 64 cows after PFAS-laced runoff from a neighbor's biosolids application poisoned his land and water. Tissue tests confirmed the contamination, but there was nowhere to turn. In a lawsuit filed with other affected farmers and environmental groups, Coleman demanded accountability from the EPA for its failure to protect farmland. The case was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, closing the door on federal help. Coleman put it simply, EPA knows about harm we've suffered and can put off doing anything indefinitely. For farmers, the message was unmistakable. There would be no rescue from Washington. Maine's response to the PFAS disaster has been a patchwork of desperation and triage. The state set aside $2 million in farm relief through 2025, barely enough to scratch the surface for more than 100 contaminated farms. Another $3 million was earmarked for research, but the costs facing each affected family tell a harsher story. For those relying on water filtration systems, annual maintenance alone can reach $5,000 per household, year after year. Multiply that by the hundreds of homes and farms now dependent on filters, and the math collapses. There is no federal relief fund. Not a single dollar from Washington has been dedicated to PFAS biosolids contamination. Attempts to secure funding in the Farm Bill failed, leaving farmers to shoulder the burden alone. The bills keep coming, including property taxes, mortgage payments, and maintenance fees, while the land beneath their feet has lost all value. In Maine, the money runs out quickly. In most states, there is no help at all. Across the country, the response to PFAS contamination in farmland is a patchwork at best. Only a handful of states have acted. Maine banned all land application of biosolids tainted with PFAS in 2022. Connecticut followed with its own ban in 2024. Michigan and Minnesota set strict usage limits, while most states have no requirements at all. In 2026, Maryland introduced a ban for biosolids above 50 parts per billion. Mississippi now mandates annual testing, and New York requires composters to test for PFAS. But in 41 states, biosolids are still spread on fields without any PFAS testing or warnings. Recent testing in Virginia paints a stark picture. In February 2026, samples taken downstream from 10 biosolids application sites showed elevated PFAS in nearly every case. The chemicals are moving through water, crossing property lines, and entering new environments. Meanwhile, the food supply itself is not immune. Consumer Reports tested 50 cartons of milk in May 2024. PFAS was found in 6 of them, including some labeled organic. With so many states failing to act, and with contamination showing up in everyday foods, the crisis is no longer just a problem for farmers. It touches every household in America. Today, over 70 million acres of American farmland remain at risk, contaminated by PFAS, unregulated and unremediated. As biosolids keep spreading, every meal could carry the legacy of this crisis. Until action matches the scale, our food system and our trust hang in the balance. What would you do?